The Marine Corps requires leaders of all ranks to have a deep understanding of war and the employment of force. MCDP 1 reminds Marines that the military profession is a thinking profession. Every Marine is expected to be a student of the art and science of war. It goes on to say that every Marine has an individual responsibility to study the profession of arms. Self directed study in the art and science of war is at least equal in importance to maintaining physical condition and should receive at least equal time. The Marine Corps Association understands the critical importance of ensuring that Marines are as mentally ready for combat as they are physically ready. That is why we offer an entire page dedicated to wargaming on our website. We have recommendations for both tabletop board games as well as computer games. And for Marine Corps Association members, there is a discount code for War Game Design Studios that you can find on the website. War games are a great way to immerse yourself in history and to put yourself in the shoes of the great leaders of history. Go beyond guided instruction and experience the thrill of wargaming. Check us out at mca-marines.org/decision-making-exercises/wargaming-2. That's mca-marines.org/decision-making-exercises/wargaming-2. Take your training to the next level. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. This is episode 200. We could say with all sincerity that this milestone is as much a surprise to us as I'm sure it is to you. But we're so thankful for your support and for giving us an excuse to run our soup coolers for an hour each week. And as a thank you to you all for continuing to tune in every week, we've got a great guest for you. We honestly wrestled with how we were going to approach our 200th. Were we going to do something in-house? Do a panel of our favorite guests? Well, I think we nailed it. For our 200th episode, we bring a treat to your ear holes, 1st Sergeant Chase McGrorty-Hunter. It would be a lie if I told you that we'd planned this, and as I'm sure many of you are aware, there's very little planning that actually goes into what we do. But it's actually amazing that we waited 200 episodes to have Chase on. But as fate would have it, Chase was back in the Q-Town area and was generous with his time to come into the studio and have a little chin wag. And a wagging of chins we did. Chase has an extensive body of work that can't really be contained in the limits of the show description. But he talks to us about his journey to the Yellow Footprints, the value of not just professional military education, but continuing education in general, and his future projects and leadership vision for enlisted Marines. We're so happy to share this conversation with you all, and we're so happy this worked out to be our 200th episode. So here it is, episode 200. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Thank you for joining us and your continued support. I'm Vic. I'm here with Nancy.
Hey, Vic, how you doing?
Pretty well. Pretty well indeed.
Good. I'm excited about our guest today.
I know, this is crazy. So I don't know how this is the first time that we've had this Marine on. I think we've definitely talked about him enough, and we've definitely have been sort of floating in the same orbits. But Gunnery Sergeant Chase McGrorty-Hunter, thank you so much for being here finally.
Absolutely. Always happy to come over.
Yeah, if we had
welcome.
done this interview a week later, I would have had to call you First Sergeant.
That's correct.
So
yeah.
congratulations on that. That's awesome. So I guess we'll start with your journey, but just to sort of, we'll try to attempt to summarize your body of work and not make this a 2-hour podcast.
Aw.
But so you are currently at 9th Com, aka 9th Crime. You are headed to 11th Marines. You're a comm bubba by trade, but you were at the Staff Academy. When we met, you had just on a whim entered into the wargaming tournament at Modern Day Marine and then took the title. You've submitted for Leatherneck.
Yes.
You've
won the
submitted for
Leatherneck writing contest
won
one year.
the Leatherneck writing contest. First shot out the gate. You've written for the Gazette. You've got TDGs coming down the pike that are absolutely fantastic. You were an instructor at Staff Academy. You also headed up the what was it, the leader symposium, right, where you would get people come in and talk, the professional development leaders.
Right. I've done a couple of symposiums,
Yeah,
either through the Bayonet Warfighting Society or through
and
the
the
Staff
Bayonet
Academy.
Warfighting Society. Holy shit, man.
Mhm.
So white space on your calendar is a premium, right?
Yeah. No, that doesn't exist. I usually fill it with something.
Yeah, and then you just had a new. Well, I guess it's now almost a toddler, but
Yeah.
yeah,
So I have a 3-year-old and I have an 11-month-old.
yeah, and yeah. So fuck. I'm tired.
Where do I start?
Yeah, let's just start from the beginning. It's like, what brought you to the Yellow Footprints?
So I always tell people this, that I feel like I grew up as a very patriotic kid. And that's kind of weird because as a kid, you don't really see kids as like, oh, that's a
You're talking
patriotic
about
kid,
like beyond just like having GI Joes. And all
right?
that
Yeah, I
stuff.
had all the
Okay.
GI Joes, and I played soldiers and all that stuff. But I always just felt like this tremendous like appreciation for the United States, even when I couldn't really comprehend what the United States necessarily was in the grand scope of the world. Some of that probably comes from obviously being in my youth, 4th grade when the towers fell, watched it on TV, right? Probably the youngest group of people that was able to
Where
watch
is this?
that.
What region?
where'd
of the
you
country?
grow up?
Yeah.
So I was in the 4th grade, and I grew up in Northern California, so
Okay.
just south of Sacramento.
Okay.
People are probably familiar with Sacramento.
Yep.
Stockton is probably the biggest town right
Yeah,
next to me.
Stockton. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was recruited out of Stockton. I went to college in Stockton before I joined the Marine Corps. So yeah, I watched the towers fall when I was in the 4th grade, so I remember that, right? I remember watching the invasion in the 6th grade. So kind of like these moments. And I just remember like my parents and everybody were always like, they showed appreciation for the United States growing up, and so that kind of was just like a trickle down thing where it's like, everybody's proud to be an American. That's kind of just the neighborhood that we grew up in.
That's the default.
Right. And then I also had some influences from family members. I knew growing up, like visiting my grandpa's house, he had this big, long wood case, and inside of it, in glass, it had medals, right? Just all these medals. I didn't necessarily know what they were, right? But the Purple Hearts in there and all these other things, right? Because my grandfather was an Air Force pilot in Vietnam. He flew B-52 bombers in Vietnam.
Shit. Yeah.
And then he goes on to get out of the Air Force after rising to the rank of lieutenant colonel and then becoming an airline pilot for TWA for another 25 years and then retires from TWA.
Wow.
So my grandfather was very patriotic. He loved his service in the Air Force. His father served in the Army in World War II. Didn't go overseas, but, so there's that service linkage to World War II. And then his grandfather, which would be my great-grandfather, served in World War One and fought for Scotland before they immigrated to the United States.
No way.
Right. So there's this lineage that goes back that my grandpa was always extremely proud of and talking about. That goes all the way back to World War One, right? And then it skips a generation and it comes to me. And so I remember growing up through high school, me and my 2 best friends, as we were growing up, both of their older brothers, I'm the oldest, but both of their older brothers joined the Marine Corps. And so we kind of saw that, like them coming back and seeing that influence. And, young kids, not with really any definitive plan. We're just like, yeah, when we get out of high school, we'll join the Marine Corps too. And then senior year rolls around and we never really put any more thought into it. That was probably the extent of the conversation. And we get to the end of senior year and I was always, academically pretty good, but I never applied myself very well in high school because I didn't have any aspirations of like, I need to go to this college or whatever it was. So we get to the end and I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to do? Well, everybody that I know is just going to community college. I guess I'll go to community college. So I go to Stockton, to Delta College, and I'm literally halfway through my first year and I'm doing just fine. And I'm sitting there on winter break, and this is like the cheesiest story I forecast.
No,
It
we've
is
heard I'm
it
sure
is
we've heard
cheesy.
cheesier.
I'm sitting on the couch on winter break by myself, and I'm watching Pearl Harbor, of all war movies, right? Pearl Harbor, Ben Affleck up there, and
Oh boy.
I'm seeing that, and I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, man, what if I go through the rest of my life and I didn't join the military, and I just have this like what if feeling. And I just remember it was like really profound. I was like, I don't want to go the rest of my life with a what if feeling about if the military was the right thing for me.
Yeah.
So I spent the next like 3 weeks literally just researching everything I could about every military branch, going on their websites, figuring out where their duty stations are, what MOSs are provided, all those different things, very analytical about it. And I developed a list of like 16 questions that I could not get answered through just Google searching and all that stuff. And this is 2011. So like I can figure out enough. So I get this huge list and I tell my mom, and I'm like, hey, I think I want to join the military. And she's like, okay, well, what branch are you thinking about? I'm like, I want to join the Marine Corps. And I remember like the instant shock on her face. She's like, you need to call your grandfather right now. And so I call or she calls my grandfather, and she's like, Chase is thinking about joining the Marine Corps. Talk to him. I was like, okay. So I talked to my grandfather for about an hour, and the basis of his argument is like, do you want to fly GP or do you want to fly first class? And he was like kind of trying to sell me on the Air Force. He's like, you guys are gonna be in the back. He's like, don't be in the back, be in the front, kind of thing. He's like, your life is gonna be so much better. Blah 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 blah. All these things. I was like, okay. Out of respect, Grandpa, I will go to the Air Force recruiter and schedule an appointment with them. So I schedule an appointment with the Air Force recruiter. I go in there, I sit down, and I'm like, hey, these are the questions that I have that I haven't really been able to get answered. And so first of all, the recruiter is sitting there in his civilian PT gear and his like Charlie short sleeve variant,
Right.
which was like slung across the back of the shirt of his chair, right? Not the best look now that I'm in the military and I know that.
Oh my god.
But I sit down and this is a scheduled appointment I had with him, right? And so I start going through like question 1, question 2. I get to question 3, and he's like, all right, I see that you did a lot of research and you have all these questions and whatnot. And he's like, but this stack of papers right here, and he like slaps his hand on this big stack of papers. He's like, these are all the applicants that want to join the Air Force. And he's like, you can come in here and you can test and you can join if you want, if you're smart enough. He's like, but I don't need to like sit here and like kind of like go through all these questions with you. I got enough people or whatever.
Wow.
And I was like, all right, very well. I was like, I appreciate your time. I stood up, I shook his hand. I was like, I'll think about it. And then I walked out and I literally just did a J hook, and right next door was the Marine Corps recruiting office. So I go up there and I just start writing down the phone numbers of the recruiters that's on the, on the blinds. And as I'm doing that, a recruiter walks out to go to an appointment. And he walks out, he looks at me, he's like, do you want to be a Marine? I was like, yes, sir. He's like, all right, get in here. And so I walk in and he sits me down with one of his recruiters, and I spend the next 3.5, 4 hours in the recruiting office. Every question I had, did the whole, like, the little tags, all the stuff. And I was just hook, line, and sinker, like I was done for. And so like I have a whole bunch of missed calls from my girlfriend at the time, my mom, all these people are like, where are you at?
Yeah.
And I get home at like 9 o'clock at night, and I walk in and my mom's like, all right, how did the appointment go with the Air Force recruiter? And I was like, Mom, I'm joining the Marine Corps. And she was like, go call your grandfather right now.
I love this.
And so I call my grandpa up and I tell him what happened. And my grandpa is livid. He's like, I will fly down tomorrow and we will go in and we will talk to that recruiter, both of us. And he's like, I was like, Grandpa, I don't want you to do that. I'm pretty sold on my choice. And he's like, no. He's like, I'll fly you up to Portland tomorrow, because he lives in Oregon. He's like, I'll fly you up to Portland this weekend, whatever. We'll go and sit down with the recruiter. He's like, he's like trying to flex his oak leaves at this point.
Yeah.
But ultimately, after talking with him for like another like hour and a half conversation, I was just like, Grandpa, this is what I want to do, right? And he's like, all right. And so he, I put him back on the phone with my mom. He's like, he's set on it. And so, so I depped in, and I spent like 9 months in the dep, because I did this in January time frame, and I didn't leave until November. So I guess that's almost 10 or 11 months that I spent in the dep, and it was like a real dep. Like, I mean, we PT'd twice a week, every week, no matter what. Like,
for our listeners, that's the delayed entry program. It's for like when you raise your right hand, you may not get a ship date right off the bat, especially if you still have a year of high school left over, or just however the shipping schedule falls. If it's a recruiting station that's doing a very good job, they've got folks lined up weeks, months in advance on when they're they get a ship date. And so so that those folks don't get fat, get in trouble, or get lazy, we put them in the delayed entry program, and then we continue to reinforce Marine Corps values and get them ready for boot camp. So,
so that was honestly about it. At that point, I was just ready to go. Everybody wants to sign up to be an infantryman. That's just kind of how the Marine Corps functions. It's the people that they recruit, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to do that. But that's also not just a reality, right? So I remember my recruiter talked me into, he was a radio operator. He's like, hey, just be a radio operator. You're going to be a grunt, basically, just with a radio on your back. I was like, oh, sounds good to me. Me and my buddy, we both signed what were called Dirty Bird contracts, DB contracts, which was actually an 06 open contract.
Yeah.
And so I didn't find out I wasn't a radio operator until the day before I got to 29 Palms. So we were about to graduate MCT the next morning. They put the list on the read board, and we start scrolling down the list, and we look, and we're like, 0651 data networking specialist for me and my buddy, who we both thought we were radio operators.
Yeah.
And so we went back to our racks and we Googled it. We're like 0651 data networking specialist, USMC. And it's like, you're always going to be in an air conditioned unit because you have to work on computers and servers and stuff like that. And after a month in MCT and 3 months in boot camp, being always in an air conditioning facility sounded actually like really good to us.
Just as you're heading out to 29 Palms.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was kind of the start, and that's what got me into the Marine Corps. Became a data networking specialist. I ended up going, my first unit is MWSS 172 in Okinawa, do 2 years there. Come back to the States as a sergeant, do 1st Transportation Support Battalion for 3 years, leave there as a staff sergeant, go to the depot. Things don't work out because of some medication that I take. And then I end up getting sent to 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, do a few deployments with them. And then I arrive at the Staff NCO Academy, and that is where we all kind of met.
Yeah.
And what is your grandfather, what are his thoughts on how your career has unfolded?
I mean, he was extremely proud. I mean, as soon as the boot camp graduation,
Yeah,
he's there with the
that's
Marine
it.
Corps red hat on as an
Probably
Air Force guy,
the
right?
most proud guy there.
The
I
most
bet.
proud, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that.
It's unfortunate because he passed away when I was staff
shit.
sergeant. When I was on my last deployment, he passed away when we were transiting out of a combat zone in Somalia to Saudi Arabia, and I get that call. And so it's kind of unfortunate because he dies right before I have my kids, right before
Yeah.
I
I'm sorry to
really
hear that.
find, I feel like I found like who I really am as a leader, as a Marine, as a person, and like, what really fuels me and drives me here in Quantico. So unfortunately, he didn't get to see that stuff, but he definitely got to see, the previous success I had in the military, and he was extremely proud of it.
That's
As
great.
he should
That's
be.
wonderful.
And I know that. Yeah, I mean, I've been nothing but impressed since the short time that we've gotten to know each other. And,
Yeah, you're the in my book of people I can say I knew them when. Like you've got a
Yeah.
spot in that.
The benefit of this show is we get to meet some like truly interesting people. We have a future episode coming up with one of the most interesting people I've ever seen in my life. But it's what I think is fascinating is about how interesting everybody has their own sort of unique sort of aspect, like that
There's
the
no
tree
cookie cutter
of
here.
interest
Yeah.
has many branches.
Oh yeah.
And so you are definitely someone that I find fascinating. So we're going to just jump around a little bit because to nail you down would be really hard to do. So you just finished a manuscript for your novel.
Mhm.
I have to say that right off the bat, so you just get it off my chest, how fucking jealous I am of you already. I've been working on mine for going on 5 years.
It was a labor of love for sure.
Yeah. So big ups. But based on the writing, I really can't wait to see it really hit the streets, because based on the writing that we've both
Yeah.
had the pleasure of reading, but then also your ideas behind it. Do you mind talking a little bit about your manuscript? I know obviously it's still in draft form,
Right.
but yeah.
Yeah, so it's tentatively titled "A Thousand Sandy Shores: A Novel of Marines in the Third World War," and the reason I came around to wanting to write that initially was because when I was at the academy, this is a whole nother rabbit hole, right? But I'll give you the quick version. I was taking an elective course on MarineNet that was titled EABO, Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations, because I wanted to learn about it myself, and it was a 9-week long course that was ran by Lieutenant Colonel Brian Kerg, who's a contributor of the Gazette, and I was trying to learn about this because I want to learn more about Force Design 2030 and all that stuff, so that I could speak more intelligently and teach my students, the sergeants, staff sergeants, and gunnery sergeants that I would teach at the academy about Force Design and really get them to understand this. And one of the lessons that we had to do was to watch a video of the command and staff class. So, lieutenant colonels and colonels getting this class about Force Design 2030 and about great power competition, all these different things. And it was such a concise lecture that really painted out in broad brushstrokes, the importance of understanding great power competition and how that has caused the Marine Corps to shift in certain ways. I quickly came away from that class just with this realization that we don't really do a great job on the EPME side of giving that big grand context, because a lot of things that we focus on the EPME side is going to be leadership based, critical thinking skills, things like that. We do get a little bit into the maneuver warfare theory and some of the warfighting philosophy kind of things, but we don't connect it back to the grander scale that OPME does a very good job of.
Right.
So I ended up developing a class called Great Power Competition and the Marine Corps loosely based on what I saw over there and then my own research so that I could start giving it to EPME courses. And I taught that while I was over there. I still teach it nowadays whenever I can get in front of a corpus course or a Lance Corporal seminar, because it doesn't matter what your rank is. You should understand the bigger picture as to why it is that we're doing certain things in the Marine Corps. So I remember I came to a point where I was like, how do I get this information in front of more people, in front of more Marines? I can't be the one teaching it every single course. I can't be everywhere. I'm only here in Quantico. And when I leave the academy, how does this continue on? How do we continue to educate enlisted Marines, particularly on this subject? And that's where I came to the point where I was like, well, what if I write a book? And I was like, at first I was like, what if I write a kind of like a Force Design 2030 for Dummies, and just kind of like lay out in, some explanations, maybe some vignettes about how we would use this in the future to try and educate Marines. And then eventually it morphed into, because I started to participate in other creative writing forms, I came up with this really short story for the graphic novel that's published by Marine Corps University Press, Destination Unknown, which is a whole series. I got to co-author one of the stories in the last edition of that. And I was like, wow, I can create a little bit of fiction, which I always felt was like a limiting belief. Like, I can't write fiction. I'm not that creative. So when I saw that I could write that one story, I was like, maybe I can make that story longer and put it in the Gazette or something like that. And then eventually those two ideas morphed, where let's not write it for the Gazette and let's not create a Force Design how-to guide. Let's morph those two things and let's make a novel.
Yeah, let's do a narrative.
What a great idea.
It's so good.
Yeah. So ultimately the purpose is hopefully Marines pick up the novel, and I can try and make it as available to Marines as possible, so that they pick it up and they read it, and they're brought in by the storyline. They want to know what happens to the characters, but inadvertently, as they go through it and they get to the end, they have learned about Force Design 2030. They have learned about Great Power Competition. They have learned about why certain flashpoints and things that are happening in places like the Indo-Pacific matter, and get a broad understanding of how future and current technologies are fundamentally changing the character of warfare and how that is going to interact with them. So like all kinds of small little things are kind of painted through the narrative to try and get Marines to understand that. Even if they don't come away being like, wow, I really learned a lot, they did learn a lot if they got through the book. They just don't know it necessarily.
Yeah, you're probably the wonderful thing, but the thing that probably doesn't translate well into sort of the Marine Corps pedagogy is there are like ELIs and TLIs, right? Or ELOs and TLOs for your
learning objectives.
When you're reading a novel. But the thing about, just through human history, is that we are much, much more tied to narrative than we are to direct speak.
Oh, you're speaking to my heart right now.
Yeah.
That was actually my, you have to do a faculty development presentation to become a master faculty advisor. That's like one of the 10 things you have to do at the academy. And the topic of my faculty development that I delivered to get my master faculty advisor certificate was the use of fiction, narrative, and storytelling in education.
Yeah.
Because we are inherently drawn to stories. I mean, you think like all the way back through evolution, it's like, if you didn't have the ability to learn from the stories that were passed on around the campfire kind of thing with your tribe, then you didn't pick up the information you needed to survive.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So we're we just kind of gravitate towards that, and so trying to capitalize on it.
Yeah, and it's really a shame, and so I'm so glad that you're picking up this ball and running with it, because there was a concerted effort, sort of my entryway, and we talked a little bit before we started recording, that the Marine Corps back, I think it was called Futures Division. I think it's now the warfighting. It's not the warfighting lab, but it was a subdivision of the warfighting lab, I believe. But it was called Futures Division. And so, and this is when I was still in uniform, and we were talking, emerging tech. We still hadn't landed on EFV, or we were still sort of feeling the pain of EFV. Hadn't landed on ACV yet. F-35 was still taking a while and getting more expensive. And so there was just a lot of and we're sort of, you could see us sort of tapering out of the long war as well. And so rather than just sort of coming up with concept papers, white letters, various tentative manuals for blah, 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 Futures Division had this idea that what if we use vignettes to sort of drive some of these point home so that the leadership, we're not just PowerPointing them to death. We actually can give something that they can read and it's engaging, and they're seeing not only why, like, not just taking our word for it that this sort of employment or piece of technology is important, but you can actually see how it would play out. And you can start to envision how the Marine Corps will operate, how it will deploy, how it will be employed. What are the, all of these various things, and you'll have an account through the narrative of the characters. And so they got folks together. They brought in actual science fiction writers like August Cole and Max Brooks.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, that's Ghost Fleet right there. That's
and
awesome
they sat
writing.
down, and so and the great idea that they had was, let's not just hire these guys to write these vignettes. When we have them teach Marines who show aptitude for creative writing to write the vignettes for us. And so they did that. They had a 1-week seminar. These great authors came in, did some teaching on, how do you write fiction? How do you write for, future wars and this stuff? And then they put all of that stuff together into a manual they sent up. And of course, I think it might be holding up somebody's desk at this point. But it was such a great idea. It didn't land at all. But yeah, it definitely was, I think it was thick enough to hold up a door that wouldn't close all the way. But anyways, I'm so glad though that you're picking it up. Because I thought that was a great endeavor, and so I'm
sure.
really long way of saying I really support the genesis behind this project. I can't wait to see it hit the streets, man. It's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited about it, and honestly, my push is just to get it out to Marines as quick as possible. These are things that are somewhat time relevant, right? We have Marines, we're preparing all the time just in case the balloon goes up, right? So I do feel that pressure that I need to get it out sooner rather than later. So I'm not looking for necessarily perfection. Obviously, I want to put out a product because it has my name on it, my reputation to back it. But I just want to get it out to Marines and see that happen.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the nice thing or the great things about what you're doing is that I know when I was going through career level school, it was don't use terms you can't define. So people would say like, oh, the OODA loop or whatever. Like, well, what's the OODA loop? Like, I don't know. It's the thing that you do decisions.
I know the
stuff
4 words. I don't know the backing of John Boyd's actual theory, though.
Yeah, exactly. and so but at the same time, like, I think the thing that's not important. So you're like, if a Marine, is talking about EABO, maybe doesn't necessarily even know what the words are and can't, but through the narrative of your characters and how that story plays out, if you were to ask them to recite your book, they could probably tell you in much more detail how EABO is supposed to look, rather than pulling out the actual operational term and graphic for EABO. So I think this is such a great.
Oh yeah. I mean, slightly different perspective, but I like to read historical fiction.
Yeah.
And what it always does is send me down the research rabbit hole. Like, okay, I'm reading this novel and it's incredibly compelling. Now I got to find out how accurate it is, and really deep dive into the ideas, concepts. Fiction is just so great for bringing people in and wanting to learn more.
Sure. Yeah, like one of my favorite books of all time is Gates of Fire. Stephen Pressfield is Battle of Thermopylae. And so it's really easy to say, like, oh, man, this is a time when, like, the 300 Spartans and maybe a few thousand other Greek, folks there held off, the entire Persian thing. Like, oh, that's cool. But then you read it and you get to, like, fully immerse in, like, everything was going on with it. You're like, oh, my God, what a great story. So anyhow, so cool. So it's not only that you are authoring this thing, you've also talked to us a little bit about your Bayonet Warfighting Society, because as we mentioned, like, you took the trophy at the Wargaming Objective 1 at Modern Day Marine next week.
Yes.
Shameless plug next week.
That's right. Was that last year that you won that, or the year before?
2 years.
2 years
ago.
ago.
Yeah,
it's
right.
the first time that they rolled out the Wargaming there.
Right.
Before they really formalized it and
That's
became
right.
the Commandant's Cup. It was the year before that where they're just like an ad hoc, like, let's have a Wargaming tournament.
Yeah.
Anybody can enter. I kind of just entered on the spot and then ended up winning that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Got some expensive booze out of it. So that's
Yeah.
cool. So I mean, clearly this is thing, and I think we had talked. You're submitting TDGs for the Gazette now. So obviously, being at Staff Academy, trying to really expand enlisted professional military education, aka EPME, and so trying to obviously at career level school and top level schools, you're seeing obviously that's a big aspect of it. You mentioned Lieutenant Colonel Kerg, J Lo, Ian.
Mhm.
Ian just left over there, and so what is it about TDGs and wargaming that you feel is more than just like rolling dice and my wizard with his whatever.
Yeah, so there's obviously there's a lot of things when it comes to TDGs and wargaming that I think are just some of the best ways of teaching people, right? So TDGs, we'll just speak on that really quick.
Yep.
I think TDGs are an amazing method of teaching certain concepts to Marines or just stressing their decision-making abilities, right? Because it's usually a one-page format, so it's not like there's like a long ask. Everybody can read one page and get immersed into a scenario pretty quickly. And then you force them to have a time crunch, probably like 5 minutes to make this decision, whatever it is, and then brief as if you were that person or that individual in that certain billet
Right.
or capacity. So you're getting them reps on all of those different things. Comprehension of the situation, decision-making, confidence in briefing that decision and standing by it and supporting it or picking it apart and trying to figure out where the gaps and the holes are to educate yourself, right? So like, yeah, the reason I even wanted to author any of the TDGs that I put into the Gazette, which there's 2 out right now in the Gazette, and you can find them on the MCA repository online. And then I just submitted a 3rd one as well. Shameless plug, right?
Oh yeah, I love
Awesome.
it, man. It's not
I'll
shame.
pay you later.
Yeah, no, there's no shame up in this piece.
The only reason I did those is because I found TDGs beneficial, just like running through it when I had a little bit of white space with the sergeants across the street at the academy. I had a little bit of time. Hey, let's run through a TDG and let's just stress some decision making. But I realized that there was not at the time any TDGs that talked about like the future fight in the Indo-Pacific more.
Right.
If you go through the repository, it's all land-based things and very much
Yeah.
Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam type scenarios.
Yep.
And there was nothing EABO style. So every TDG I've published, I've done a concerted effort to make sure that they are on islands, they are in the littorals, and there's decisions being made with like future technology, right?
Yeah.
So that's the only reason I got into like making those myself, because I just wanted to see more EABO style things and things that Marines might face
Love
in the
that.
future. But getting into the wargaming thing, because that's been a huge passion of mine, I was lucky enough to be able to do some experimentation with wargaming when I was across the street at the academy. I think it's just because, I took it on and I found it very beneficial, and I kind of just, I was the squeaky wheel over there saying, hey, can we do this? Can we do this? And luckily I had gotten enough trust from my academics officer over there, as well as the sergeant major and, some of these people that could say either yes or no or stick to the script kind of thing.
Yeah.
They gave me a lot of leniency to say, go ahead and experiment. As long as you're staying within the bounds of, what we're expecting to teach these people, let's make it happen. And so they allowed me to bring operational level wargaming to the career school for the very first time. And I got to, for about the last year and a half that I was there, do operational wargaming at the career school. And so what I did is I actually built like a full package. So that class that I told you I created with Great Power Competition and the Marine Corps. So we would teach that class, and I would talk about Great Power Competition in a historical sense. So using the Peloponnesian War as an example, Athens versus Sparta, and talking about that, and then how regional Great Power Competition manifested or changed throughout time to become global great power competition, and how it's basically manifesting on the world stage right now in contemporary times between China and the United States. And then I would explain Force Design 2030 and how it all relates, right? And then after that, we would transition to wargaming, and I built out like a full scenario using Littoral Commander, which is always at Objective 1, right? Sebastian Bay, just an amazing game.
Yeah.
Because now I get to reinforce, hey, I just talked to you about Force Design. I talked to you about why we're doing certain things that we're doing in certain parts of the world. Now, let me give you a scenario where half the class is going to be, China, and half the class is going to be United States, and I give them each secret briefs, right? So I kick out half the class and say, here's your brief. Here's your enemy, or here's your enemy situation.
Sounds like fun.
Here's your mission statement from 2 levels up, whatever. Here's the capabilities that you have, and here's the intel of the capabilities that you think that the adversary has, right? And so I would use technologies that are real life because they're in the game, and the game is just projected out to 2030. So then the Marines get to go and play it. And, in a competition of wills, people are more competitive. That's just how Marines are, right? Make anything a competition, they're going to get into it, right? So Marines would be very competitive, wanting to win, which would then in turn make them want to be good at the game. And if they're good at the game, then they are figuring out the mechanics of it. If they're figuring out the mechanics, they're figuring out how these technologies actually interact in real life too, inadvertently. So they would come away from the game with what I would call a fundamental base level knowledge of how we would operate and fight in the Indo-Pacific, right? So they're using, even if they don't know what a HIMARS is, they're using a HIMARS.
Right.
Even if they don't know what an MRIC is, right, a medium range intercept capability, basically Iron Dome, because we just barely acquired this in the Marine Corps. So when we started playing this, we didn't have it in the Marine Corps, but now we do, right, to some extent. So now they're coming away from the game with a little bit of a knowledge of this is how this stuff interacts, and this is how this capability supports the Marine Corps, and this is how we could use it in a future fight. So they come away from it with this great understanding, and they're interested in it, hopefully, right? You don't catch them all, but you catch some of them where they're more interested in it, they want to learn more about it, and then that spins the wheel. And ultimately, what I always told my faculty advisors when I taught the faculty advisor course, when I just was a staff in CYC, is your job is to spark the imaginative thinking inside of your students. If you're not doing that, whatever you're doing, you're failing, right? So however you get to that point where you spark the imagination, where you spark that moment where, hey, I want to read about this. I want to go pick up the Gazette, or I want to, do my own research.
Yeah.
When you've done that, and when a student comes up to you and they ask for more material, or they ask for more resources, you got them. You did your job, right? And so that's ultimately what I think we get out of that.
And how did you get interested in the topic?
So, that kind of goes back to me creating the Bayonet Warfighting Society, which formerly it was the Quantico Warfighting Society. It's now the Bayonet Warfighting Society. I just made it location agnostic because I figure I'm going to continue to PCS while I'm in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, you can't keep changing the name. Can't keep rebranding.
So I rebranded, right, my last rebrand. But basically at that time frame, again, these are all rabbit holes, right? But when I was doing all this stuff and I was kind of learning about force design myself, because when I got to the academy, I was functionally illiterate in the Marine Corps, is what I think, right? I was very effective as a staff NCO in the Marine Corps, going out and establishing communication networks in austere environments all around the world. And I was objectively very successful just based on my reports and everything that's gotten me to where I was in my career at that point in time. But when I got to the academy is when I first learned that I was functionally illiterate in what the Marine Corps truly is and what the purpose of the Marine Corps truly is. Because I started to, the introduction to the academy was I checked in with my buddy, Gunnery Sergeant Navarro, who still works over here in Quantico. He's an 0369. I'm an 0639, all right? So just flip around the numbers a little bit, right? I'm a cyber networking chief. He is an infantry, right? An infantry leader. And we check in on the same day, and they say, Gunnery Sergeant Navarro, you have U.S. Constitution as your first class. Staff Sergeant McGrorty-Hunter, you have MCDP-1 Warfighting Philosophy. And I'm like, are you sure you guys don't want to swap that? Because I'm like a history nerd at heart, and I can do U.S. Constitution. This guy's, an infantry squad leader, right, or a unit leader. He could probably teach warfighting philosophy on MCDP-1. So that was my first introduction to I need to learn other stuff that I don't know. And so it took me off the absolute deep end of learning MCDP-1. So I go all the way back to the 1980s, and I'm like learning about the intellectual renaissance in the Marine Corps, the gray years with General Gray. I reach out and I just, I do what I have learned to do now a lot, which is cold call people. So I figured out how to get in touch with John Schmidt, who wrote MCDP-1, and I'm doing a Zoom with John Schmidt, and we're talking through MCDP-1. And then I get hooked up with all these other individuals that helped him write it during the 1980s, and so I'm like learning from the grassroots. Because of that, I get really interested in MCDP-1. I get really interested in maneuver warfare theory and warfighting philosophy and all these things. Those things all start to build my knowledge. I get introduced to really what Force Design 2030 is, and I start to understand the importance of it because I didn't necessarily know the importance of it before and why we're doing those things. And then I'm starting to get to the point where I'm teaching this stuff at the academy, and I also start to realize Quantico is a special place for good reasons and bad. And the bad was a lot of these students that were coming to me at the academy, these are all people that are if you're in Quantico, there's really no other way to skin it. You're either supporting training or you're supporting administration of Headquarters Marine Corps, with the small exception of like HMX1, who is actually doing a mission. Everybody else is supporting training or administrative. So I felt that Quantico was a special place where Marines could get disenfranchised with their service pretty easily because they're not doing the typical Marine thing, especially first term Marines or people that haven't gone on the deployments like I had at that time. Like, you know, if you haven't had that experience, you could really feel like, man, this is not what I signed up for.
Yep.
And so when I got to that point where I knew enough stuff that I was passionate about, and I also saw that there was this disconnect that just existed in Quantico amongst Marines, I felt like I needed to take my knowledge that I did have, the little bit that I had at that time, and I needed to try and impart that on Marines outside of the ones that would come through my classroom. And so I took some inspiration from the 1980s, where during the intellectual renaissance, where they're basically developing maneuver warfare within the Marine Corps. What was happening was a lot of these young Marines that were attending things like EWS at the time, they were meeting up after hours with people like Colonel Wiley and whatnot, and they were doing their own little warfighting society where they get together, and these officers, for the most part, are like, they're picking apart maneuver warfare. They're trying to figure out how the Marine Corps is going to change and get better. And this is all spurred by, you know, how the Vietnam War turned out. And they, you know, also we're in the Cold War. The Marine Corps is always on the chopping block, especially in the Cold War, because people just don't think amphibious warfare is going to be relevant in a nuclear power. And so like there's a lot of conflict in the Marine Corps in the 1980s. They're trying to figure out how to best move forward. Maneuver warfare kind of becomes the answer in the 1980s. And a lot of it was because there was a grassroots movement of Marines getting together after hours to try and figure out these problem sets and debate the profession of arms. And so I just wanted to do the same thing. I didn't know necessarily how to do it. I get hooked up with Damien O'Connell, who runs the Warfighting Society Grand, right? And so I was trying to figure out, I think I was going to call it like the Warfighting Team or something like that. And then somebody like was like, hey, there's a Warfighting Society thing. And so I looked at it. I was like, oh, that aligns with what I was trying to do. And I basically launch it from there. It becomes that, and I start to put together the after-hours meetings after work, bringing in Marines to do lectures, things like that. I brought in, Colonel Schmidt. I was bringing in people from Force Design 2030 team to do briefs, things like that. And then I was doing wargaming at that time too. I started bringing in the war games. I started doing TDGs with people. So I started to just take everything that I could and give it to Marines in that fashion. It's probably, it's transitioned a lot more heavily onto my Instagram nowadays because I have been in transition between PCSing and stuff. So it's not like I'm holding in-person ones. Once I get my life settled as a first sergeant and I really figure out that role, which is the most important thing, I'll probably move back to trying to do some things like that in Camp Pendleton, some actual in-person things too.
That's so cool.
That was the longest answer of why I got to that point, though.
I mean, that's
awesome.
It's what a podcast is all about.
Yeah.
If you didn't talk, man, you just hear me flapping my gums. So the thing there, I think there is a common thread here, and that is that you're finding the narrative in all of these things, and I think that is such a great aspect, especially for Marine Corps leaders. Not to say that there's a vacuum of that in the Marine Corps. I mean, shit, I've been out for long enough. I have no idea what fucking the only vacuum I know is the one I push around my house. But I will say though that
you vacuum?
I've seen it done.
There's a room where that vacuums for him.
I get the concept.
What is this life you're living?
Yeah, no,
the robot does it.
Okay. I understand the concept, right? You turn it on, you do like this with the arm.
I'm super impressed.
Yeah.
If you're really doing it. But anyway, okay, sorry. You were thinking deep thoughts, and I'm just
I know. No. It's not. I mean, on a very like a bell curve sort of deep. Anyhow, so if we are looking at this stuff, and so in my time, but I think maybe it's the byproduct of like fully 17 years of my career was spent in the war, and so you don't have a lot of these luxuries. And we did TDGs because if you don't have a training area, and especially because we were constantly getting intel from stuff that was actually happening, and like, well, let's break this down because I don't want the first time that they've even understand that this is a new enemy TTP to be when the enemy's using it against us, right?
Right.
So we would do sand table exercises and things like that, but it wasn't anything nearly what it was. Very results based. Mm-hmm. Everything was results based, and it was pragmatic because I don't have a lot of time. Like I'm already 3 months. We just came off a deployment. I'm already behind the curve on my workup for my next deployment. And so I think we lost the imagination as Marine Corps leadership in a lot of these ways, because we really got focused on the long war. We got the counterinsurgency thing was it. Like that was what we did. And at the same time, technologies were emerging, and then the dynamic of the world changed, but we no longer had to worry about, or we weren't focused as much on the tentacles of Al-Qaeda, when now we have a peer threat that has not, I mean, if you think about it, I was listening to another podcast as I was coming in today, and in 2004, China was behind Italy for GDP. As far as what they were producing as a country in 2004, they were like 7th or 8th behind Italy. That big ups to our Italian brothers.
And their ability to power project was limited to the Indo-Pacific.
Right. Well, they didn't have the GDP to create, because they were still developing this manufacturing epicenter that they have become now. And now within a decade plus, they are rivals to us in almost every metric that it matters. And one where they've probably exceeded us is their ability to integrate emerging technology into their acquisition cycle, because they don't really have an acquisition cycle, right? Jesus, you want something, people start building it. Anyways, really long way of saying that I'm so happy to see leaders like you who are attaching themselves to more than just to learning objectives, and are trying to tie into these threads, because these concepts we're talking about are so nuanced and really so revolutionary, which is why we had an entire cabal of people who were against Force Design 2030 when it was unveiled. And so I think the thing that's really going to help us as a force, but overall as a multiplier in the overall DoD way it's going to project, is by attaching to that narrative, so we can maybe I can't tell you the exact definition of what a stand-in force is, but I can sure as hell articulate what it's supposed to do, because someone has shown me how it's going to play out, and the integration of emerging technology, and what it's going to mean to be alone and unafraid on an island, and how we're going to support this thing logistically, which I still haven't heard a compelling argument for how we're going to do that yet. And so, like, all of these things, like, what will a mechanized unit look like in EABO and for a stand-in force, and how is air going to play, and everybody's in the WES, so what do we do with these big decks and all that stuff, man? It's so good.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on any one of these things at the end of the day, right? I'm a cyber guy, and at heart I'm a teacher, but you can do enough research and piece together enough of these things to say, hey, in this story that I'm going to present you, whether it's my book or some of these fiction writing contests that you see in like the Gazette, for example, it's like here's one way of looking at how the multiple ways that this could play out, right? And hopefully it just sparks imaginative thinking again in another individual to say, oh, well, with my knowledge as a logistician, maybe I can think about how that happens in my community, or so however it plays out like that.
Yeah, or I'm from Guam, or I'm from Puerto Rico, and this is how life is on an island, which someone from like Des Moines, Iowa, was not going to have any idea about it. So when you start to spark that imagination, like you just said, amongst the force, especially from the the younger generation that's coming up, who has a much better grasp on what it means to integrate emerging technology, I think.
My bio on my Instagram on the Bayonet Warfighting Society is good ideas have no rank structure, right? And it's something that I truly believe in, right? And that comes down to engaging at all levels, right? I want to hear what the Lance Corporal has to say about whatever the topic is, just as much as I want to hear what the Colonel has to say.
Yeah. And you're not going to spark that imagination by just throwing ELOs and TLOs at somebody.
No. And a slide deck.
Yeah, so good. Well, this has really been really great. I guess. Oh, before we close out though, tell us about why you're actually in town.
Yeah.
Like, this is very exciting.
Okay. So I left Quantico in August, and so in the months since then, I've been back to Quantico 3 times, right? I've never been to the East Coast in my entire Marine Corps career, and since leaving, I've been back 3 times already.
Can't stay away.
The grasp is there.
It is the crossroads.
Yes. So I got brought back really because I was doing my Marinet training. Do your Marinet training, Marines. But I was doing my annual Marinet training, and I had to do the anti-terrorism awareness training, and I guess I hadn't done it in a long time. Because when I went in there and I did it, I was like, man, this is a pretty updated class, and it's actually really relevant. Because a lot of the stuff that they were talking about in there has shifted from the anti-terrorism training of old, which was like, this is how you protect against VBIDs and stuff. And it's like, okay, but this isn't the anti-terrorism that we have to worry about necessarily in the United States, right? It was kind of geared towards overseas stuff. Well, they had adapted it to where now the anti-terrorism training is focused on threats that you would honestly probably see in the United States more prevalently nowadays, things like mass shootings. And so I went through this training, and because of my own background in 2017, when I was a staff sergeant, I was attending the Route 91 Country Music Festival in Las Vegas with my wife, and the mass shooting happens there, right? So the largest mass shooting in Marine Corps or in United States history. And I went through this slide deck or this training, and I was like, man, this is really good. And so I actually reached out like on the little MarineNet like write us thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, hey, I just went through this training. I want to let you know, like, this is actually good, right? The things that you talk about in the slides, these things are actually like real, just based on my own experience. And I just kind of like shared, like, I was just here when this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, hey, a lot of the stuff you talked about was actually really, really good. And it actually is exactly how my mind was thinking in certain points of that, living through that experience. And so I quickly got a response like within minutes. Like I was getting a call from Headquarters Marine Corps ATO team, the anti-terrorism team, and they're like, hey, if this is your experience, if you're willing to talk about it, whatnot, we want to update the training anyways. Do you think that you'd be willing to come out here? We'll fly you out here to Quantico, and we'll sit down and we'll record you kind of like talking about your experience, and then we can then link that to the training, kind of, revolutionize it. And I was like, hey, I think that's a great idea, because ultimately, like, Marines are going to go through their annual training, they're going to click through the slides, and they're going to soak in a small portion of it, right? But I think that there's definitely something
Back
about
to that narrative.
Yeah, there we
yeah,
go.
there's
Right.
something about, like, I see a Marine, like I see somebody in my own position, he's wearing the same uniform as me, and he's talking about how he had to go through this
Yeah.
situation. Now the situation is more real because I see somebody that is just like me that had to go through it. I didn't think I was going to be in a mass shooting
Yeah.
when it was happening. I was still like, I cannot believe this is happening. Like, that's going through my head when I'm trapped there on the ground.
And you wrote about this for Leatherneck.
I did, yeah.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, so you'd have to go back a couple years, I think September 2022 or something like
I'll have
that.
to look. We'll put it in the show
Uh,
notes.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
great article. Really,
Yeah.
you talked about what was going through your head and how you reacted and how you made your decisions. And
Yeah, so
really
Sky
good
on
piece.
Fire was the name of that article. But yeah, so we decided, hey, let's get together. So I actually spent yesterday we did a site survey of the places where we're going to shoot at, and then this morning we went and we shot at a few locations at the Marine Corps Museum, and then some locations over here, green screen. I kind of walked them through this, and they're going to be editing that up, and they're going to be pushing it out. So every Marine will be seeing my face on the training, whether that's a good thing or bad thing. You see me on annual training, it'll be on there. But ultimately, like, I presented the story, in a different fashion, one that's maybe more relevant to civilians and Marines in a better context. At the Marine Corps Ball, when I was a guest of honor, I presented a few times as part of one of my classes, the Profession of Arms class at the Staff and CO Academy. And what I realized by telling that story, because for the first few years I never told the story at all, what I realized by telling that story is that it connected with Marines on a very real level. And I would always have Marines coming up to me afterwards saying how much they appreciated me sharing the story, how much they got from it. Because ultimately, I think the through line of the story is not necessarily any one action I took or anybody took during that night. The real through line of it is what I explained in the Leatherneck article, which is that my title as a Marine put me in certain positions that night that other people probably wouldn't have been put in, simply because of, like, the title Marine that I carried. It wasn't because of my aptitude or my abilities or my training or anything like that. It was because people knew I was a Marine, that I was put into situations where I had to make decisions that didn't just hold my life in the balance, but it held the lives of other people. And so really I try to drive home in the video, and any time that I talk about it with Marines, is the ultimate story, or the ultimate, like, plot line is that at the end of the day, our reputation precedes us no matter where we go. And that reputation, that sounds like a bumper sticker or a
Right.
slogan or something like that, but there's also a real gravity, a real weight that comes along with that. because when you get in a hairy situation, like I did it at the mass shooting or anything else, whether it's a car crash on the 95,
Yep.
people, when they see that you're a Marine or where they figure out that you're a Marine, they're going to be looking to you to be the decision maker. And you have to be ready for that moment. And I'm not saying I necessarily was ready when I was a staff sergeant for that moment. I don't think anybody ever is necessarily ready for something like that. But you have to be able to act, because people are going to be really looking to you to be the example. And so that's ultimately what we're trying to share with creating that video for people. And again, you can always check out the story in the Leatherneck. If you want like the narrative version, you can go on YouTube to my my YouTube via the Instagram. You can see the ball video. And if you're ever, you ever need somebody to talk to your Marines, I'm always willing to come out and help out a unit too.
That's awesome. Yeah. So we'll share all those links in the show description. But Chase, man, thank you so much for coming in. Again, I think probably the most amazing part of this is how this is your first time being on the
I know.
show.
Yeah, we've all worked together a lot.
Shame on
Who
us.
the hell's napping on the job around here?
I know. Why are you looking at me?
Because only 3 of us, and it's not his fault. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. This is it's really great. I'm sure we missed something, so we'll get you back on.
We definitely did, but I'm just gonna tuck that away.
Exactly.
And
we'll get you back on the
follow up.
Yeah,
because you'll be back to Quantico whether you realize.
Oh yeah,
it or not.
Like what day is it?
We'll do a yearly show recap.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome.
Well, best of luck to you. Congratulations on the baby, on getting your feet planted in SoCal. You almost hit God's country. Oceanside's pretty close, man. But yeah,
congratulations on the promotion
Yeah,
too.
cool.
Looking forward to
So
seeing
good, so good.
how the rest of your career unfolds.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and yeah, awesome. Thank you. Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.